Thank you, BJ. All right. Now, here's a challenge. Go and talk to a bunch of Unitarian Universalists about compassion. That's like, pick your analogy, preaching to the choir, explaining to teenage kids how to text, explaining to Aaron Rodgers how to throw a touchdown pass. I mean, pick, any. And then talk to this group just a week after they've heard a wonderful sermon on the same subject by one of the best ministers, preachers we have ever had in this church. Well, okay, we grow from the challenges life hands us. At least that's what I'm counting on. I've called these remarks the complexity of compassion. Although when Sylvia first asked me to do this today and reminded me that compassion is the UU theme for the year, I was first inclined to say no, because, well, what can you say about compassion? Of course, you should have compassion. You should exercise it. I live and move largely among a group of people for whom compassion seems to be second nature. It seems to be almost instinctive for us to comfort the afflicted, and on occasion, where appropriate, to afflict the comfortable. We have seen examples of people comforting or going to the aid of those who are close to them, family, close friends. Yet we've also heard countless moving stories of people going not just to help those close to them, but even putting their own lives at risk to pull strangers from burning cars or the swollen waters of a flooded river. And we are awed by such remarkable human devotion. But then I consider the many instances where people don't seem to have the same impulse. I see it, of course, in horrendous terrorist atrocities that are now a regular part of our daily news, and recently closer to home than we thought possible. In less dramatic but still devastating criminal acts of a more mundane nature, I see it in political agendas that I cannot understand for their stunning callousness about people's lives and fundamental needs. In its most extreme form, lack of compassion or empathy is recognized as a disorder in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, which says, quote, "Lack of empathy is one of the most striking features of people with narcissistic personality disorder. It's a hallmark of the disorder in the same way that fear of abandonment is in borderline personality disorder. Narcissists do not consider the pain they inflict on others, nor do they give any credence to others' perceptions," says Dr. Les Carter in the book, "Enough of You, Let's Talk About Me." Gotta read that book. They simply do not care about thoughts and feelings that conflict with their own. Do not expect them to listen, validate, understand, or support you. This is exacerbated when the person has a touch of antisocial personality disorder, then it becomes frightening, unquote. There's another disorder also noted in the DSM called compassion fatigue, a syndrome that is common among caretakers, especially individuals caring for a loved one without sufficient support, who may experience great and sustained fatigue and stress. Another kind of compassion fatigue, not listed as a psychiatric disorder, but common among many people who are inclined to want to help whenever possible, occurs when the number of problems to which they wish to respond simply becomes overwhelming, a phenomenon that is especially common at this time of year. But this is a different issue, and we have all probably seen cases of individuals who seem, for whatever reason, almost incapable of caring for those around them. Let me say at this point that there is one thing about human nature that makes this understanding of compassion or lack of it all the more challenging. We have a very strong tendency to assume that the rest of the world, that the people around us, all view what they see in the same way we view it. And it can be really surprising to find out that they don't. An example. Many years ago, when my involvement in the National Organization for Women required me to move to Washington, D.C. from my home here in Wisconsin to take national office, I experienced considerable culture shock. There was certainly less of the easy personal interaction I was accustomed to here. You didn't, for example, just chat with strangers in line at the supermarket. They would look at you blankly or with suspicion. And there was something about moving about on a daily basis with huge masses of people on the expressways, in the stores, on the subway, that had a strangely isolating effect. But the hardest thing for me to relate to was that the people in that area didn't value niceness. Now, niceness, of course, is the ultimate Midwestern value. Think Prairie Home Companion. I often found people in D.C. cold or brusque or even sometimes downright rude. When I started to ask my friends and coworkers in now circles why people weren't, well, nicer, they would figuratively turn up their noses and say something like, oh, no, niceness is phony. Niceness is superficial. Their preference, they would say, was to be more straightforward, more honest, more direct. Niceness was shallow. Well, I ultimately decided that I'd really rather have shallow pleasantry than candid nastiness. You are undoubtedly aware of other examples, but we all view the world through a filter made up of our own experiences and background, including ethnicity, geography, education, family history, personal experience, etc., etc. And that means that the odds of anyone else viewing what we see in exactly the same way are virtually nil. So while you and I may assume compassion as a fundamental part of our nature and assume the same thing is true for everyone, there are those who, for whatever reason, because of their upbringing, their ethical framework, their political or philosophical agendas, do not see it that way. I used to wonder, for example, when politicians did what I regarded as mean-spirited things, such as refusing to extend unemployment benefits or support food supplement programs for the poor. I wondered if such people had perhaps been mistreated as children or experienced some kind of trauma that left them insensitive to the realities of other people's lives. Well, while I think that was probably oversimplistic parlor psychology, I did happen across one interesting incident. Recently, in reading The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, a biography of Roger Ailes, founder and still the animating spirit behind Fox News, I came across this interesting, if troubling, incident. Though Roger had hemophilia as a boy, his father felt that shouldn't be an obstacle. He said, according to Ailes, "You're going to lead a perfectly normal life. Don't ever back out. Don't ever back away. Don't ever be afraid." But Robert Sr.'s lessons sometimes had a cruel edge. The cruelest occurring in the bedroom Roger shared with his brother Robert. Quote from the book, "Roger was standing on the top bunk. His father opened his arms wide and smiled. 'Jump, Roger, jump,' he told him. Roger leaped off the bed into the air toward his arms, but Robert Sr. took a step back. His son fell flat onto the floor. As he looked up, Robert leaned down and picked him up. 'Don't ever trust anybody,' he said." According to the book's author, quote, Stephen Rosenfeld, who worked for Roger's consulting company in the 1970s, considered the episode his Rosebud story, a moment that defined and haunted his boss. Ailes told it to him on several occasions with pain in his voice. He was upset by it, quote, "He was upset by it, but also felt his father was teaching him an important lesson," Rosenfeld recalled, "which is why I think you're describing a guy who doesn't have a lot of friends," unquote. Certainly, the apparent lack of empathy or compassion in some legislators cannot all be attributed to harsh or sadistic parenting practices. There are also moral, ethical constructs that may promote similar attitudes. George Lakoff, professor of cognitive linguistics and author, posits two such fundamental models in our culture, which he sees also reflected in our primary political philosophies. One he calls the strict father model. This model is built on, quoting Lakoff, "the traditional nuclear family with the father having primary responsibility for the well-being of the household. The mother has day-to-day responsibility for the care of the house and raising the children. But the father has primary responsibility for setting overall family policy, and the mother's job is to be supportive of the father and to help carry out the father's views and on what should be done. Ideally, she respects his views and supports them. Life is seen as fundamentally difficult and the world as fundamentally dangerous. Evil is conceptualized as a force in the world and it is the father's job to support his family and protect it from evils, both external and internal. The father embodies the values needed to make one's way in the world and to support a family. He is morally strong, self-disciplined, frugal, temperate, and restrained. He sets an example by holding himself to high standards. He insists on his moral authority, commands obedience, and when he doesn't get it, metes out retribution as fairly and justly as he knows how. It is his job to protect and support his family, and he believes that safety comes out of strength. In addition to support and protection, the father's primary duty is to tell his children what is right and wrong, punish them when they do wrong, and to bring them up to be self-disciplined and self-reliant and respectful of authority. The strict father provides nurturance and expresses his devotion to his family by supporting and protecting them, but just as importantly, by setting and enforcing strict moral guidelines. This builds character. For the strict father, strictness is a form of nurturance and love, tough love. The strict father is restrained in showing affection and emotion overtly and prefers the appearance of strength and calm. Once his children are grown, once they have become self-disciplined and self-reliant, they are on their own and must succeed or fail by themselves. He does not meddle in their lives, just as he doesn't want any external meddling in his life. Though many features of this model are widespread across cultures, Lakoff says, the no meddling condition, that grown children are on their own and parents cannot meddle in their lives, is a peculiarly American feature, and it accounts for a peculiar feature of American conservatism, namely the antipathy toward government. Then Lakoff juxtaposes the nurturant parent model. Here, the family is either of one or two parents. Two are generally preferable, but not always possible. The primal experience behind this model is one of being cared for and cared about, having one's desires for loving interactions met, living as happily as possible, and deriving meaning from one's community and from caring for and about others. People are realized in and through their secure attachments, through their positive relationship to others, through their contribution to their community, and through the ways in which they develop their potential and find joy in life. Work is a means toward these ends, and it is through work that these forms of meaning are realized. All of this requires strength and self-discipline, which are fostered by the constant support of and attachment to those who love and care about you. Children are taught self-discipline in the service of nurturance, to take care of themselves, to deal with existing hardships, to be responsible to and for others, and to realize their potential. Children are also taught self-nurturance, the intrinsic value of emotional connection to others, of health, of education, of art, of communion with the natural world, and of being able to take care of oneself. In addition to learning the discipline required for responsibility and self-nurturance, it is important that children have a childhood that they learn to develop their imaginations and that they just plain have fun. Through empathizing and interacting positively with their children, parents develop close bonds with children and teach them empathy and responsibility towards others and towards society. Nurturant parents view the family as a community in which children have commitments and responsibilities that grow out of empathy for others. The obedience of children comes out of love and respect for parents, not out of fear or punishment, unquote. These then represent two widely different worldviews of value systems that animate many people's lives and define their moralities. And we see them manifested daily in our personal lives, our workplaces, our communities, and in our governance philosophies. But if those two worldviews are equally valid, at least in the minds of people who espouse them and live their tenets, how can we say that a compassionate mindset is preferable? I don't mean to be simplistic, but really, need we look farther than this community of which we are fortunate to be a part? A three-part series from PBS entitled The Emotional Life outlined the characteristics of close relationships. They were the ability to love and be loved, mutual understanding, caring, a source of direct help in times of trouble, celebration of good times, validation of self-worth, security, a diversity of ideas and influences to help us grow and learn, and fun. The researchers who contributed to the program also found that people with strong social connections have less stress-related health problems, lower risk of mental illness, and faster recovery from trauma or illness. Friends and family can also encourage and support us in healthy lifestyle habits, such as exercise and moderation. Researchers have found that people are happier when they're with other people than when they're alone. And the boost is the same for introverts and extroverts. They also are finding that happy people are more pleasant, helpful, and sociable. Did we not know that? Happiness may be surprisingly contagious. Psychologist James H. Fowler studied the data of 5,000 people over 20 years and found that happiness benefits other people through 3 degrees of connection, and that the effect lasts for a year. He says, "We found a statistical relationship not just between your happiness and your friend's happiness, but between your happiness and your friend's happiness." In addition, the positive effects from connecting with others are lasting. Now, while these facts may not relate directly to compassion, in researching this topic, I have found what seems to me to be an inevitable connection between and among compassion, empathy, and community. A lack of any or all of them seems to be a source of many of the challenges that presently face us. Where, for example, was the empathy in Ferguson as a young unarmed man fatally shot lay in the streets for 4 hours? Where was the compassion in the streets of New York City as Eric Garner lay dying? Does compassion not demand that we rush to the aid of anyone who says, "I can't breathe"? Where was the sense of human community in the heart of the police officer in Cleveland who shot 12-year-old Tamir Rice, who was playing with a toy gun in the park in the snow, shot him 2 seconds after his squad car pulled up in front of the boy? And why did there seem to be an utter lack of compassion or empathy in those who performed unspeakable acts against other human beings in dark places in other parts of the world in our names? In numerous news reports, I heard repeated that those who did those things and those who approved them thought that they were, quote, carrying out the will of the people, unquote. Not my will, not yours. It is going to take a powerful amassing of all the compassion the human community can muster, a rising of the righteous, to stand against this deterioration of our essential bond as human beings, but it has to happen. We have to become strongly intolerant of the injustice, the bigotry, the inhumanity we see around us. I have to say, it did my heart good to see Senator Elizabeth Warren stand up on the floor of the Senate in the last few days, railing against the inhumanity inherent in the alleged fix that would allow the government to continue to be funded, when it included provisions that would allow political contributions 10 times larger than the already intolerable level, and would further allow continuing of financial practices that caused the collapse of the housing market several years ago, with taxpayers responsible, again, for picking up the bill if that happens. She was an avenging angel. She lost, apparently, but she wakened a healthy fighting spirit in legislators who think that they were elected to serve the people. We haven't seen that kind of passion for the people in any of our elected leaders for a long time. It was good. Karen Armstrong, again, whom Scott referenced last week in her book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, says, "We are thinking beings with a fully developed neocortex and have the ability to take responsibility for our efforts to live more kindly and rationally. Indeed, we have a duty to protect ourselves and others from our more destructive instincts. Do we want to succumb to our reptilian brain when we have seen for ourselves what can happen when hatred, disgust, greed, or the desire for vengeance consume entire groups? In our perilously divided world, compassion is in our best interests." The world is a very big place, but we can begin here, where we live. There are problems of racial tensions and misunderstanding, countless problems of poverty, for starters, that we can focus on. We who are fortunate to be a part of this loving, compassionate community need to be sharing that gift to become, as our Open Circle vision statement says, quote, "a transforming presence in the lives of individuals and in the Fond du Lac community," unquote. I'm going to close with the wisdom of a philosopher I greatly admire, one who, in fact, walks among us. This, then, is from a recent column by our friend Margaret Jarek. Quote, Within each and every one of us is a capacity for the highest degree of nobility, as well as a capacity for behavior that can be so horrific, so heinous in its manifestation, that it overwhelms the psyche of any student of history who attempts to explain or comprehend it. This, in turn, can easily lead down a path of extreme pessimism, even despair, that could be likened to what some have called the dark night of the soul. No race, no nation, no culture is unstained by atrocity. It's not as if we haven't been given a map that, were it followed, could lead us to a place of enlightenment and more enlightened behavior. Over the millennia, there have risen among us many whose example and wisdom have offered us a compass that could have taken us to a state of being marked by an enlightened spirituality. Still, I believe that in the private lives of countless numbers of us, there have now and always have been acts of compassion, of sacrifice, of heroic generosity that go unremarked upon in the annals of history. This omission leaves us with a distorted image of ourselves and the capacity for goodness that we possess. It is to these unsung, undocumented, and overlooked deeds, shining like stars in the dark firmament of night, that I cling, and upon which I center my hope that somehow, some way, in some as yet unforeseen manner, we will evolve to a state of being that truly is illuminated by our latent nobility, and that ultimately does justice to our potential to create a culture that will shine like a beacon across space and time. I cannot, I must not, I will not give up hope that we will finally arrive at the center of that winding labyrinth to a state of being in which we fulfill our highest calling. To view ourselves, as seems to be the current position of silence, as virtual science, of virtual prisoners to our genome, or our cultural environment, is both patronizing and defeatist. We are, as a species and as individuals, greater than the sum total of our parts, with an almost infinite range of possibilities to break out of such deterministic enclosures. For this reason, I will neither surrender my belief that the best is yet to come, or relinquish my hope in our capacity to fulfill our great destiny. May it be so. All right, the